In Halifax, they say the fog off the harbour doesn't just swallow ships. It swallows people who ask too many questions. But what if the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard walked into your pharmacy at 7 in the morning, holding the hand of the little boy you'd been quietly slipping picture books to for the past 3 months? Bronwyn Teal was 26 years old and already running on fumes. She worked the early shift at Bayside Pharmacy on Barrington Street. 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when Dina called in sick. The pharmacy was a narrow, slightly tired establishment wedged between a dry cleaner and a Portuguese bakery, the kind of place people came to because it was close, not because it was impressive. Bronwyn had been working here for 2 years, ever since her father, Gordon Teal, was diagnosed with ALS. The provincial health plan covered what it covered. It did not cover the mechanical ventilator that now sat in the corner of her father's bedroom in their bungalow in Dartmouth, or the specialized physiotherapist who came 3 mornings a week, or the private nursing aide who stayed through the night so Bronwyn could actually sleep. It did not cover any of that. Those costs added up to a number that Bronwyn had stopped looking at directly, the way you stop looking at a solar eclipse. She knew it was there. She knew it was big enough to ruin her. She just kept her head down and kept filling prescriptions. The boy first appeared on a Tuesday in October. He came with a large man in a too-tight jacket who shoved a prescription slip across the counter without making eye contact. Bronwyn had seen 100 versions of this man, the hired hand who'd rather be anywhere else, jaw-grinding, phone in the other hand, already halfway through a mental list of other errands. But the boy was different. He was small for his age. She'd learn later he was 8, though he looked younger, with dark, watchful eyes and hair that someone had tried to comb but hadn't quite managed. He wore a good coat. An expensive coat, actually, the kind of wool that didn't come off a sale rack. But his shoelaces were tied wrong, one bow larger than the other, the asymmetry of a child who'd tied them himself because no one had checked. He didn't speak. He stood at the man's elbow and looked at the rack of reading glasses next to the counter, then at the blood pressure machine bolted to the wall, then at Bronwyn. His gaze was the kind that made her feel briefly transparent. She smiled at him. He didn't smile back, but he didn't look away either. The prescription was for an antibiotic. The large man paid cash, took the bag, and left without thanking her. The boy lingered for exactly 2 seconds, looking at the small rack of children's sticker sheets near the register. Cartoon animals, little rockets, smiling vegetables, before following the man out. Bronwyn stared at the empty doorway for a moment. Then she went back to work. He came back on Thursday, a different large man this time, same too-tight jacket aesthetic, same phone, same cash. The boy stood in the same spot and looked at the sticker rack again. This time, when Bronwyn handed over the bag, she folded a single sheet of rocket stickers inside and said nothing. The man didn't notice. The boy noticed. He looked up at her. Just a flicker, a fraction of eye contact, and then walked out. By the end of October, it had become a routine. Different handlers, always large, always distracted, always paying cash for prescriptions that ranged from blood thinners to anti-nausea medication. The boy, she didn't know his name yet, always stood in the same spot, always watched, always silent. Bronwyn started slipping small things into the bags. A sticker sheet, a foil-wrapped candy. One afternoon, a small board book from the children's section she'd asked her manager Sadia to stock for waiting parents. The next time he came, the boy reached into the bag himself while the handler was signing, found the book, and pressed it briefly against his chest like something precious. He set it down on the counter a moment later, smoothing the cover flat with one small palm. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and pushed it across the counter. Bronwyn waited until they'd gone to open it. It was a drawing in green marker, a stick figure behind a tall counter with a rectangle in its hand, and a smaller stick figure on the other side reaching out. Between them, a green squiggle that might have been the counter or might have been a bridge. In the bottom corner, in careful blocky letters, "Thank you." Bronwyn looked at that drawing for a long time. She pinned it to the corkboard behind the register, between the staff schedule and the emergency contact list, and she thought about how hard a child had to be working at Silence before silence became their first language. She thought she was just being kind. She didn't realize she was being chosen. The handler who came on the 3rd Thursday of November was different from the others. He was younger, thinner, with red-rimmed eyes and the specific jitteriness of someone either hungover or just hollowed out. He dropped into the waiting chair so hard the plastic creaked, he didn't look up from his phone. For the first time, the boy stood at the counter entirely alone. Bronwyn leaned forward slightly. "Hi, what's your name?" The boy looked at her. His lips pressed together, not rude, more like the question required negotiation. He pulled a small notepad from his coat pocket, a real one, spiral-bound, the kind kids use for school. He wrote something and slid it across the counter. Jasper. Jasper, she repeated, keeping her voice low. That's a good name. I'm Bronwyn. He wrote again, weird name. She laughed, an actual laugh, quiet but genuine. Yeah, my mum was Welsh. I got the full package. He almost smiled, just the corner of his mouth, barely a twitch, gone in an instant. But she saw it. That was the day she started paying for extras out of her own pocket. She added a small bag of gummy bears from the pharmacy shelf to his prescription bag and charged it to herself. $3.40 she didn't really have. She did it anyway, because Jasper was eating from a bag he'd brought himself, while the handler sat 3 feet away on his phone, without once offering the child anything, and because the drawing on her corkboard had started to feel less like a thank you note, and more like a distress signal she'd been too slow to read. The morning everything changed was a Wednesday. Just after 7, the pharmacy barely open, the Portuguese bakery next door already pushing the smell of warm bread through the wall. Bronwyn was restocking the vitamin shelf when the door chimed. The hungover handler was back, and he looked worse than the last time. He dropped into the waiting chair so hard the plastic creaked. He didn't look up. Jasper went to his usual spot. Bronwyn came over. She was about to ask if he wanted his gummy bears when she heard it, a sharp crack of sound, and Jasper's small body lurched sideways. The handler had come to the counter without her noticing. He had Jasper by the collar, yanking him backward. Move, the man hissed. Stop standing in the way like an idiot. Jasper hadn't been standing in anyone's way. He'd been standing exactly where he always stood. Bronwyn saw the color drain from the boy's face, the particular white of a child who has been grabbed like that before, who has already learned that going rigid is safer than pulling away. Something in Bronwyn's chest went very still. She came around the end of the counter. She walked directly to the man and stopped 18 inches from his face. Let go of him, she said. The man looked at her with the expression of someone who could not quite believe what they were hearing. Mind your business. This is my business, Bronwyn said. Her voice was very calm, which surprised her because her hands were shaking badly. You are inside my pharmacy. He is a child. Let go of him right now, or I am calling Halifax Regional Police in the next 30 seconds. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and held it up. Her thumb was already on the screen. The man's jaw worked. He looked at the phone. He looked at Bronwyn. He looked at the dispensary counter, where Sadia had appeared, and was watching with her arms crossed and her expression like granite. He released Jasper's collar. Jasper stepped sideways immediately, putting the counter between himself and the man. You have no idea what you're sticking your nose into, the handler said, but his voice had changed. He was recalculating. I know exactly what I'm doing, Bronwyn said. You can wait outside. The prescription will be ready in 10 minutes. Jasper stays here. The man stared at her. Then he swore, low and sharp, and walked out. He stood on the sidewalk through the glass door, pacing, watching them. Bronwyn let out a slow, controlled breath. Her hands were trembling so badly she set her phone face down on the counter so she wouldn't drop it. She looked at Jasper. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not awe exactly, more like the shock of being caught when you didn't expect the net to be there. She reached under the counter and set a bag of gummy bears in front of him. Sit down, she said gently. He can wait. Jasper sat on the bench just inside the door, the bag in both hands. After a moment, he pulled out his notepad. He wrote something and held it up. He'll tell my dad. Let him, Bronwyn said. My dad will be angry. At you? Jasper shook his head. He pointed toward the window where the handler was still pacing. At him, and maybe at you. I can handle a conversation with your father, Bronwyn said, with considerably more confidence than she felt. She was not prepared for Raphael Devereux. 40 minutes later, 4 black SUVs parked in a row on Barrington Street in defiance of the no-stopping zone. The handler, who had been pacing outside for the better part of an hour, saw the lead vehicle and went completely still. His cigarette dropped from his fingers. The man who stepped out of the first SUV did not hurry. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit, and he moved across the wet sidewalk with the deliberateness of someone who had not been rushed in many years. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with close-cut dark hair going silver at the sides. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, thin and pale as a seam. He spoke to the handler for less than a minute. Bronwyn watched through the glass. She saw the handler's knees buckle. She watched him grip the door frame. 2 men from the second vehicle appeared at his elbows and guided him away to the last car. Then the man in the charcoal overcoat turned and looked at the pharmacy. He looked at Bronwyn. He walked toward the door. 3 men fell in around him, not rushing, not aggressive, simply present, the way weather is present. The door chimed. Sadia, at Bronwyn's shoulder, whispered, "That's Raphael Devereux. Bronwyn, please be careful." Raphael Devereux walked across the pharmacy floor and stopped at the counter. His eyes were dark and absolutely level, the kind that did their arithmetic quickly and quietly. He looked at Bronwyn, then he looked down at Jasper, who had come to stand at her side. Something shifted. Jasper reached out and took his father's hand, and Raphael Devereux's fingers closed around his son's without any visible softening of his expression. But some internal weight redistributed itself, invisibly and completely. "You're the pharmacist," Raphael said. His voice was low and unhurried, faintly accented in a way she couldn't quite place. "Pharmacy technician," Bronwyn said. "Bronwyn Teal." "Mrs. Teal." He said her name once, testing it. "I understand you had a disagreement with one of my employees." "He grabbed your son hard enough to bruise," Bronwyn said. "I asked him to stop." Silence. Very complete silence. Even the traffic noise from Barrington Street seemed to pause. "How hard did he grab him?" "Hard enough that Jasper went white," Bronwyn said. "Hard enough that it looked like it had happened before." The muscle in Raphael's jaw moved, a brief, violent clench. He looked down at Jasper again. He released his son's hand and crouched, this enormous man in an overcoat that cost more than Bronwyn's monthly rent, and turned Jasper's collar back, checking his neck. He said something quietly in French. Jasper shook his head once. Raphael straightened. He said, "Go wait by the door." Jasper looked at Bronwyn first. She gave him the smallest nod. He went. Raphael Devereux put both hands on the counter and leaned forward slightly. The men behind him didn't move, but she was suddenly very aware of them. "You could have called the police," he said. "I still can," she said. Something flickered in his expression, not anger, more like surprise, the way a chess player looks when a pawn makes an unexpected move. "You know who I am." "Sadia told me," Bronwyn said, "after you walked through the door." And yet, she agreed. He studied her for a moment. She studied him back, because she was too frightened to look away and too stubborn to show it. "There is a position," he said finally, "that has been vacant for some time. It requires discretion, patience, and an apparently inexhaustible willingness to stand your ground against people who could make your life very difficult." He paused. "You appear to have all 3 qualifications." "I have a job," Bronwyn said. "You have a father in Dartmouth with late-stage ALS," Raphael said, his voice quiet and utterly without cruelty. "You have a private nursing aide whose invoice is 3 months overdue. You have equipment costs that your provincial coverage does not touch, and $43 in your checking account as of this morning." He tilted his head slightly. "Shall I continue?" The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the December air outside. "You are not a thug, Miss Teal," Raphael said. "I don't need another thug. I need someone my son trusts, because he has not trusted anyone in 11 months. And you," he looked toward the door where Jasper was standing, watching them both with those dark, steady eyes, "appear to have managed it in 12 weeks with sticker sheets and gummy bears." Bronwyn swallowed. What happened 11 months ago? He was quiet for a beat. "His mother was killed, a device placed under our vehicle. It was meant for me. Jasper was in the car." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The silence after the words was specific and heavy. He has not spoken since that night, not one word. Bronwyn looked at the boy by the door. She thought about the notepad, the careful block letters, the drawing of the bridge between 2 stick figures. She thought about her father, who at least still had his voice, even as everything else was leaving him, and how she drove to Dartmouth every night after her shift and read to him until he fell asleep because it was the only thing left she could do. "What exactly are you offering?" she said. "Your father's care," Raphael said. "All of it. Private nursing around the clock. The best ALS specialist in Atlantic Canada, brought on as a personal commitment. Equipment, medication, physiotherapy, indefinitely, regardless of what happens between you and me, that care continues for the rest of his life." He produced a business card from his jacket pocket. "Plain cardstock, a number, nothing else. You come with me today. You live at the property, in a room beside Jasper's. You keep him company. You keep him safe. You try to bring him back. And if I say no, then I arrange a car to take you home," he said, "and I move on. The offer doesn't repeat." He glanced toward Jasper, but he won't stop looking at this door. Bronwyn looked at Jasper. Jasper was watching her with the precise, unblinking attention of a child who has learned that adults leave, and is trying to calculate whether this one will. She pulled off her name badge. She set it on the counter. She looked at Sadia, who gave her the most complicated look. Terror, sympathy, and a small, decisive nod. "I need 5 minutes to tell my colleagues I'm leaving," Bronwyn said. Raphael Devereux straightened. "Take 6. The estate was 40 minutes north and west, out of Halifax proper and into the hills above the arm, where the properties grew large and the roads grew quiet. A stone manor house, 3 stories, older than it looked, with cedar hedges that blocked every view of the surrounding land. Inside, the house was immaculate and almost completely cold. Not cold in temperature, but cold the way museums are cold. Everything in its place, nothing touched. There were no photographs anywhere in the main rooms, not one. A woman named Mrs. Holt showed Bronwyn to her room in the east wing, adjacent to Jasper's. Her old phone was collected. She was given a new, secure one. She was told the perimeter was monitored, that she was not to leave without notifying the head of security, that the west wing was private. She found Jasper in his room, sitting in a window seat, looking out at the birch trees in the last of the November light. His room was full of toys. None of them looked played with. The bookshelf had books arranged too perfectly, spines uncracked. Everything was there, and nothing was used. The whole room preserved like the rest of the house, like a space someone meant to come back to and never did. "Hey," Bronwyn said, sitting on the edge of the window seat. Jasper leaned sideways until his head was resting against her arm, not asking, not demanding, just leaning. They sat there until the light was gone. It was on her 5th night at the manor that Bronwyn found the drawings. She couldn't sleep. The house made noises she hadn't learned yet, the tick and sigh of old stone, wind behaving differently here than in Dartmouth. She got up for water and took a wrong turn in the dim corridor, opening a door she thought was a linen cupboard. It was a small utility room, clearly used recently, a sleeping bag folded in the corner, a child's backpack on a hook. On the back wall, at Jasper's height, there were drawings pinned in a row, maybe a dozen of them. She stepped closer. The early ones were chaotic, dark colors, shapes that bled into each other. She recognized Jasper's style from the corkboard drawing, but these were nothing like the careful thank you note. These were something a child had made in the dark. Toward the right end of the row, they changed. One drawing showed a road and a car rendered in black and red. Beside the car, a large figure in dark clothing. The figure's hand was raised, and inside the raised hand, Jasper had drawn a small rectangle, a device of some kind, a phone or a trigger. Above the figure's head was a speech bubble with a single word in careful block letters, "Quiet." Bronwyn stood very still. The figure wasn't the tall silhouette she would have associated with Raphael. This figure was shorter, wider through the shoulders, with a detail she kept returning to. On the left wrist, Jasper had colored a mark, triangular, sharp-cornered, deliberate. The kind of mark a child fixes on because adults never think children are paying attention. "Those are private." She spun around. Raphael Devereux stood in the doorway in dark clothing, arms at his sides, face unreadable. She hadn't heard him coming at all. She didn't apologize. She turned back to the drawing and pointed at the figure. "This isn't you," she said. A pause, then he stepped into the room. He looked at the drawing for a long moment. Something happened in his expression that she could not have described. Like watching ice crack from underneath, invisible until it was already done. "No," he said, "it isn't." "The person Jasper saw on that road," Bronwyn said. "He drew them." "I know." He sat down on the folded sleeping bag, Raphael Devereux, sitting on a child's sleeping bag on a utility room floor, his overcoat pooling around him. "He comes here when he can't sleep. He's been drawing them since the week we moved in. He won't show them to me." He looked up. "He showed them to you." Bronwyn looked at the mark on the figure's wrist. Triangular, solid, drawn from close range. "Do you know what that mark is?" "A tattoo," Raphael said. "Someone who was close enough to the car that night to be within sight of it when the device activated. Someone who knew exactly when we would be on that road." His voice stayed level and very quiet. "I have been looking for that tattoo for 11 months. "The person who told them your route," Bronwyn said. "Is still in this house," Raphael said. "I know it. I have not been able to prove it." He looked at her directly. "Until now, I did not have anyone I could trust who was also someone my son would draw pictures for." Bronwyn absorbed that. "I need to see Jasper's drawings," Raphael said. "All of them. And I need him to tell me, through you, through whatever language he uses, who that mark belongs to." He held her gaze. She held his. "All right," she said. She didn't push. She'd learned that from Jasper himself, who communicated entirely in his own time and retreated completely if she reached too far. She spent the following days in the greenhouse off the east wing, warm even in December, smelling of damp earth. potting seedlings, playing cards, sitting nearby while Jasper drew. She began asking small questions in the middle of other things, casually, like tossing stones into water to see the ripples. "My gran had a tattoo," Bronwyn said one afternoon, not looking up from her book. "A little anchor on her wrist. She got it when she was 20 and regretted it by 40. Jasper's pen slowed. "Did the person in your drawings have something like that?" He shook his head. He turned the notepad and drew quickly, a triangle with interior lines. Not just a shape, a crest, a bird, angular and geometric, rendered with the precision of a child who had stared at something long enough to memorize it. Bronwyn kept her voice calm. "Did you see it close up?" He nodded. Then he wrote. He leaned into the car window before. He had something in his hand. He pressed it and walked away fast. "He works here." She read it twice. Her stomach dropped. "Do you know his name?" Jasper shook his head. He wrote one more thing and held the notepad up. "He smells like the cedar hedge." She was in the kitchen the next morning making tea when Aldous Haig came in. The head of security had been introduced to her on her first day, a compact, blond man in his late 30s, with the comfortable authority of someone who managed things efficiently and invisibly, always pleasant, always present. The kind of person a busy household stops noticing because he handles everything and asks for nothing in return. He reached past her to get a mug from the cabinet. As he did, his sleeve pulled back from his wrist. On the inside of his left forearm, a geometric mark birder rendered in dark ink, triangular and angular and precise. Bronwyn picked up her tea. She walked back to the east wing and did not run. She texted Raphael on the secure phone. "I need to through Haig." He was there in 7 minutes. She told him about the tattoo, about Jasper's note, about the cedar hedge. She watched his face go very still. The particular stillness of a man who has had a long time to prepare for the answer and still finds it costs something to hear. "He's been with me for 9 years, Raphael said. "I know," Bronwyn said. "He was at the house the night my wife died." "I know." Raphael was quiet for a long moment, then very simply. He said it in a way that was separate from everything else between them, something clean and real and not owed. What happened in the hour after that, Bronwyn was not present for. She stayed in Jasper's room and read aloud from a novel she found on his shelf, cracking its spine for the first time, pages stiff and new. Somewhere in the west wing the house shifted on its axis. There were no shots that she heard, no shouting. Only a long weighted silence, and then the sound of vehicles leaving the property through the cedar-lined drive. When Raphael came to the door of Jasper's room, there was a bruise forming at his temple, and his right hand was wrapped in a cloth. His expression was different from anything she'd seen on his face before. Scraped open, exhausted, grief-stricken, and somehow lighter, as though something he had been carrying for 11 months had finally been set down in the right place. Jasper looked at his father in the doorway. He looked at Bronwyn. He slid off the bed and crossed the room and stood directly in front of Raphael, tipping his head back to look up at him. He reached up and touched the bruise at his father's temple, very gently, with 2 fingers. And then, in a voice that came out rough and unpracticed, hauled up from a very great depth, "Does it hurt?" Raphael went absolutely still. Bronwyn pressed her hand over her mouth. Jasper said it again, slightly louder. "Does it hurt, Dad?" Raphael dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor and pulled his son into his arms, and the sound that came out of him was not the sound of a dangerous man. It was the sound of a person who had been carrying something impossible for nearly a year and had just, at last, been allowed to put it down. Bronwyn turned toward the window, giving them the privacy of it, looking out at the dark birch trees and the winter sky above them, enormous and cold and brilliant with stars. 7 months later, on a Tuesday morning in late June, Bronwyn unlocked the front door of Teal & Company Pharmacy on Agricola Street. The space was small and carefully arranged. Better light than Bayside, a children's corner in the back with a low table and a proper selection of books. The sign above the door was simple, navy blue on cream. She'd argued about the name for 3 weeks. Raphael had let her argue, and then arranged the lease anyway. She was tying her apron when the bell above the door chimed. Raphael came in without his overcoat, which she'd decided months ago meant he was off-duty in whatever way off-duty existed for him. Jasper was at his side, talking, still talking constantly now, as though making up for 11 months of silence all at once, about something that had happened at school, a class project involving a papier-mâché volcano that had apparently gone significantly off-script. They sat at the children's corner table. Jasper pulled out his notepad out of habit, but he used it for drawing now, not writing. His speech therapist said he was ahead of every projection she'd made. Bronwyn brought 2 coffees and a hot chocolate. Raphael's mug and looked up at her. Sadia starts Monday. She needed a change of scenery, Bronwyn said. And I needed someone who knows how to handle a full dispensary without me having to explain the filing system twice. He nodded. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. Not asking. The way you don't ask about something that has quietly become true over a long winter of shared meals and evening walks around the property and nights where Jasper fell asleep between the 2 of them on the library sofa, his breathing slow and even and completely unafraid. Jasper looked up from his drawing. He turned the notepad around. 3 figures at a small table. The proportions were much better than they used to be. He'd been taking an art class on Thursday afternoons and it showed. A tall man, a woman with her hair pinned up, a boy between them with his elbows on the table. Underneath, in careful block letters, the same hand that had once slid a thank you note across a pharmacy counter to a woman who had no idea what she was getting herself into, 1 word. Us. Bronwyn looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee and leaned her shoulder against Raphael's, and the bell above the door chimed as the first morning customer came in from the street. Outside, Halifax was damp and green and completely ordinary. The harbour fog had lifted with the sun, and for once it had taken nothing with it.